The top 5 hacks to maximize your child's RESP. So many parents are, saving for the kids' education with RESPs, but there are some ways that you could do it more effectively. So RESP is generally the most effective way to save for your child's education because you get some government support, and because when you withdraw it, it's taxable to the child if they're while they're in university, not you. So which means it can essentially be tax free. So yeah, assuming because they have all their deductions when they take it out. So it can work out really well. But how can you save these amounts and put in and provide enough and yet cost less? So what we're going to cover today is how much might a 4-year degree cost in 18 years? It depends on what you include, but I'll show you the different options there. Is it good for your child to pay for their education? Interesting philosophical question. So what asset allocation is best to maximize your child's RESP? So what are the RESP contribution rules? How do most parents contribute to their child's RESP? What are the top 5 hacks to maximize your child's RESP? What are the issues with using an in-trust for account? And should you use a family RESP or individual RESP? Okay, so first of all, what might it cost? So we do this planning for our clients, and the question is, how much do you actually want to save? And do you want to pay for the tuition, the room and board? They will also have, spending money and, of course, beer, but transportation, all that kind of thing. So it depends on what you want to pay. What I find for a lot of parents is if they want to pay for the bulk of it, they would pay for tuition and room and board, but generally, assume the child is going to earn enough to pay their own spending money and transportation. If they want to live at home, then instead of paying for the room and board, they pay the transportation. If they live in residence at the university, there won't be much. So a typical cost varies, but it might vary less than you think. So tuition can be, let's say, $8,000 a year. It's been going up by about 5% a year, like more than inflation. That's even before inflation was high recently. Room and board is about 12,000. It varies a lot depending on what you do, but again, it's been going up by inflation. So if we take those two numbers and these, you end up with about 168,500. Let's say 170,000. That might be a reasonable estimate. In your case, you should probably look at what specifically you would want to pay for, what inflation rate do you want to apply on it, and then come up with your own number. And if your child is not, not a newborn, is less than 18 years from retirement, then you can increase it by less than 18 years. Now, is it good for your child to pay for their education? So now what we actually find with our clients that are parents, they mostly fall into 3 categories. The first ones, they just want to pay for everything. The education is important to them. They don't want the child to struggle. They want them to focus on their studies. So they just want to pay for everything. There's a second group that says, we're just going to pay for tuition only. That's it. So if they want to pay for room and board and spending money, they have to figure that out themselves. If they want, they can live at home for free, and then they only have to pay for transportation. But, let the child learn something about money, and they can pay for that part themselves. So, and the third group is kind of in the middle, where they say, okay, we'll pay tuition, and maybe we'll pay half of room and board. And part of that is just because university is expensive. And, if you look at the full cost of tuition and spending money and all that, it would be a lot for someone to earn, on a summer job or part-time job while attending university. So we just pay half. So that's kind of what most parents pay, but it's up to you what you actually want to do. Now, the philosophy of, is it good for you to pay for your child's education? Education is important. Yes, it's good to support kids with it, but there's a big issue related to money skills, and I see this a lot of time with, even university skills. It's amazing how you think university students are smart, but a lot of times they have no money skills at all, shockingly little. So, and what studies have actually shown is the more money you give your children, the less they have in the future. Now, that may sound counterintuitive, but it actually is true. Now, here's why. So, if children are good with money, they will always have money, and that's true whether you give them money or not. So, and getting a student loan and paying for their own university, it's actually a good experience in learning about financing and making payments, and now it's actually a good experience for them. So, and the other side to it is, if your kids don't learn any money skills and they're bad with money, they will never have money. It doesn't matter how much you give them, they'll never have it. I've seen university students that, at universities, the credit card companies show up and they give you credit cards very easily that you wouldn't even qualify for, even a few years later when you have a job. And you don't have a job, but they give university students credit cards. And it's a good way to kind of get them into it. It's surprising how many university students think it's free money. They just run up the card, and when that one's full, just get another card and run it up. And if you've got someone who's bad with money, they're just never going to have it no matter how much you give it to them. So the idea there is if you're going to support them, it's good to do it in a way that teaches them money skills. So how do you teach money skills? That's a topic for another video, much more involved. But a lot of his kids need to have experience making payments. And if you just go out and pay for everything and they never have to pay anything, they don't learn how to do it. Right? So they should have some things that they have to pay themselves. It's a good idea for them to have a job. Even so when they graduate from university, they have something on their resume to show that they know how to show up for a job and do some work. So some of the ways that I've seen parents do it is sometimes parents say, you know what, I'm going to save for their child's education, but I'm not even going to tell them. So I'm going to tell them they have to pay for it all themselves. And then as they go through it, I'll give them some money if they really need it, or at the end, they get student loans at the end, I'll actually pay off the student loan for them. So, but that way they've learned it all the way through. And if they're really short, then you come up with it. But so that's one way to do it. Another way is just to show them the savings and the costs. So you can show them your own income and expenses, but also you can walk through with them. This is what lifestyle costs in university, and this is what the university tuition cost, and this is so you can save some money, but show them how much you've saved and show them that it's investments and how the investments grow and how you're paying it off. Like it can be a really good education. So anyway, a couple possible ways to do it. So now, what's the best asset allocation to maximize your RESP? Again, you should pick whatever investments suit your risk tolerance and your growth and your goals. If you're trying to maximize it, the best way to do it is with equities. And you're saving for a child, it's 18 years and then at university for a few years. And surprisingly, like people think the stock market goes up and down a lot, but do you know that after 20 years, the stock market is actually more predictable than bonds after inflation. And that's, with a 200-year study. So stocks vary a lot in return after inflation for short periods of time, 1, 2, 5 years. But once you get to 10 and more, it's actually not much difference, or 20 years is more. It's actually less, it's actually more predictable than bonds. And on top of that, the returns are just way higher over the long term. They compound much faster. So that is generally the way to do it. There is an issue, and this will get into your own risk tolerance, is in the last few years. So the kid turns 18, now you're taking the money out. So, maybe when they're 15 or 16, you may want to start putting it into something more conservative. In reality, you don't really have to if you're, unless it's really a major problem if you, decline a little bit. But, if they're 15 or 16 or even 18, you're taking the money out over 4 years. The market is 90-95% of the time over a 4-year period. So it's probably going to be up. And, when the market falls down a lot, it usually recovers within 1 or 2 years. So you're quite likely going to be better off by staying in stocks all the way through, but it's possible you won't. So that's something to decide for you based on your own time. So your own situation. So now, what are the RESP contributions? There's just a few of them. So basically, you get a government grant for 20% of your contributions up to a limit. So that's a good thing. It's free money. So that's actually great. So also the maximum grant is $500 per year. So to get that, you have to contribute $2,500 per year. The maximum lifetime grant is $7,200, which means you have to contribute $36,000. And you contribute as soon as the child is born and you have a SIN number, you can start. And you can do it all the way up until the year in which your child turns 17. And the maximum lifetime contribution is $50,000. Okay, so those are kind of the main rules. Now, what do most parents do? Most parents just start putting in $2,500 a year. Often they don't. They skip the first year or so when they're on maternity, and then they just start putting in $2,500 a year until they've got to the maximum, and then they stop. And, I have an illustration here. You show I put 8% rate of return. That's kind of somewhat conservative. It's got the lowest, very long-term return that the equities get. So we think of that as a fairly conservative, pretty likely return that equities should give you over a period of time. So even though, stock market generally is done higher than that, but let's use that number because it's something you want to be reasonably confident you'll get. So if you're saving $2,500 a year and you do it until you maximize the grant. Now, interestingly, if you start when the child's newborn, you actually maximize the grant when they're 14. You put in $2,500 a year. When they're 14, you only have to put $1,000. You've got the whole $36,000 in. You got your $7,200 grant. So they're just doing it to get the free money. And then you save maybe $115,000 by going it that way. Okay, so how do most parents contribute to their child's RESP? Now, the most common thing is they just start putting in $2,500 a year, and basically they're just thinking about how to get the free money, how to get the grant, right? So you start $2,500 a year. Often they skip the first year or two on, maternity leave, and cash flow is tight, and they just put in $2,500 a year until they've maximized the grant. Now, if you do that, you maximize the grant when your child's 14. So you can contribute to 17, but you maximize it when you're 14. So, put in $2,500 a year. The 14th year, you put only 1,000, you've got the full 36,000 in, and you've got the maximum grant. And so I've used 8% rate of return here. That's kind of the somewhat conservative long-term expectation for the stock market. It has generally done higher than that over time, but we want to use a somewhat conservative number, so we're fairly sure that we'll get this over time. So with an 8% rate of return, $2,500 a year, and you get your grant money. Then by age 18 to go to university, you have $115,000. So, and you've put in $36,000 over a period of time. So now hack number one that is fairly easy to do is, well, you've gotten used to putting $2,500 a year. So why stop when the child's 14? Even though you don't get a grant on it, just keep putting the $2,500 in. Okay. You could also put it in another account, in trust for account, which is more flexible if you want, but just keep putting $2,500 in. And actually what I've seen a fair number of parents do is they've just gotten used to doing it. So while the student is in university, they keep giving them $2,500 a year. So that's part of their university cost. They give them a little bit, and they've just gotten used to paying $2,500 a year, until your child finishes university. The last few years you don't get grant, but you just kind of get used to doing it. By doing this, you're up to $127,000 when at age 18, when the child goes to university. So that's a little bit better. Now, these next two hacks I attribute to a good buddy of mine, Ted Warkentine, who came up with these ideas that actually started me down this rabbit hole of thinking of ways to maximize the RESP. So the first thought was, what, why not just put the whole, you could put 50,000 in. Why not just put the whole thing in right at the beginning and you're all done? Okay. And my thought of, that is, you only get the grant in the first year, then you don't get the grant all the other years. And his point was, what does it matter? Because you have the whole amount invested early, it's all growing. And so you end up with here, you see this, you actually end up with quite a bit ahead here. Even though you only got $500 of grant, you end up with $218,000 at the end. So not a bad option if you've got the money to put in ahead of time. And this means you don't have the money, but the child has it. If you take it while they're in university, it's all taxed to them, and there should be little or no tax on it. So it's a neat kind of tax savings. Now, another version of that, so this was his other idea. So why don't we contribute to get the grant? Okay, but remember, you don't have to put $36,000 in to get the grant. So, but you could put it up to 50. So there's an extra $14,000 that you could put in. So why not just put that in up front? So the first year you put in $16,500. Okay, you only get grant on $2,500, but then after that you do your $2,500 every year, and you get up to $50,000 when the child's 14. You get the full grant, and now you're up to $176,000. So all you've done is put an extra $14,000 in at the beginning, and you stop at age when your child's 14 because you put the maximum in. You can't keep going, but you end up ahead by doing it this way, by putting it in early. So two cool hacks. Thank you, Ted. So now a fourth one that I thought of is if he's going to put the whole 50,000 in one shot, why not put it into an in trust for account? So an in trust for account is, you, the parents, in trust for your child. And if you invest for capital gains, it's taxable to the child. So it's essentially tax-free. While they're young, they're probably not earning anything, so it's probably tax-free. And you can put all the money in there and then take money out of there to put into the RESP. All right, so you put 50,000 in there from the beginning, but year one you put in your 16.5. Remember, that's the maximum you can do, and then you just take out $2,500 every year until you maximum grant in. Okay, now by doing that, you actually end up with about 245,000. So now remember, you put the whole 50,000 in at the beginning, plus we've managed to get the grant all the way through. So you end up with 70,000, let's say, that's in the in trust for account, plus 176,000 in the RESP, so you're up at 245,000 overall. So it's a fair amount better than they just put the 50,000 into the RESP. All right, so hack number 5 is a thought of, how can we maximize this? We'll get the maximum benefit, but put in less contribution. What's the minimum contribution we have to do? And so using this idea of using the trust for account, I worked out that you only have to put in 34,000 in the first year into the interest for account at the beginning. So you put in 34,000, and what happens is you're going to end up contributing 50,000 to the RESP. But if you put the 34,000 in when your child is a newborn, even though you're taking money out of it, it should grow enough to get to the 50,000, so you can put the whole 50,000 in over time. If you end up a bit short, you just put a bit in yourself. But basically, the 34,000, if it grows at 8% a year, should give you the full 50,000. So you put your 34,000 into the in trust for account, take your 16,500 out to put into the RESP, and then 2,500 a year till you've maximized the grant. And I took the amount that we end up with basically nothing left in the trust for, but you end up with 176,000 in the RESP. And so this way you've only put in 34,000, not the full 50. So that's another cool strategy. So now let's compare all these options here of what to do. So here's the normal way and the 5 hacks. So notice the normal way you only put in 3,600, and then the other ways you've put in more. Now the thing is, you notice the normal way plus the way where you just continue up to age 17, you actually end up short. Like if you assume that the university degree costs around 170,000, the normal way people do it. So remember, this is the 100% equity. A lot of people even invest more conservatively, but you end up with 115,000 the normal way, and 127 if you're going to age 17. But you're way short of the 168,000 that you need. Now, with all these hacks, any one of these 4 hacks, you end up with most likely more than enough to pay for this $170,000. With hack number 3, you didn't get much grant, but you got good growth. With hack number 4, you've actually put in less money up front. You've only put in the 16,500, but you end up with good growth over time. And then the in trust for accounts methods, number 4 kind of beats number 2 because it's number 2 plus getting the grant money. And number 5, you're putting in less. You're only putting in 34,000. So even what the normal way that people do it with 36,000, they're putting in 2,500 a year until you maximize the grant. So they've only put in the 36,000 to get the grant. But here, if you're putting in up front, just 34,000 gets the full 50,000 into the RESP, and you end up with enough to reach your goal. So it's a good idea to consider some of these grants. Now, most of them require putting more money in up front, okay, which is kind of an issue for many people. However, if you look at some of these, there are ways to reach your goals. So basically what you're doing with this is you're planning your life. I think some people just think of it as, oh, the government's offering free money, so let's just get it. But, this is a way of you're planning your life. If you're trying to pay for your child's education, let's figure out how much it is. Let's do a good estimate. Let's find a good way, and let's try to save that amount so that you have it when you need it. Now, so what are the issues with using an in trust for account? So the last 2 hacks use an in trust for account. So there are recent new rules which they're a bit in transition and not clear at this point exactly what's going to happen. However, what the rules basically say is if you have to file a T3 trust return if you have an in trust for account that's over $50,000. Okay, so now a trust return, you get an accountant to do it, it's going to cost you $500 or $1,000 to do it. And there's no tax owing, you just have to file this return. And if you don't file it, there's very severe penalties that you'd have to fill in. So that can be a real downer for this kind of strategy. Now, this is required if the 50,000, if your in trust for account is over 50,000 any day of the year. So even if, let's say you have a fair amount less than that, but it briefly goes up and goes back down. If it's over 50,000, even one day of the whole year, you're required to file it for that year. So a real pain. And this whole issue, actually, it was called the Bear Trust debacle. So what happened is these new rules were put out and clearly not thought through, because the intent was to try to get, billionaires that are putting money in trust and try to find that. But what the government didn't realize is there are literally millions of people who have in trust for accounts for their kids. And, it's an alternative way to save for education and for, a lot of them use it to save for a house down payment for their kids or something like that. And so literally millions of people have these. And also there were a bunch of other people if they go on the home for their parents, or parents go on their home for the kids to help them qualify. All of those are trusts, and all of those would have to file. So, it looks like when they came out with these rules, they hadn't realized there's probably a few hundred people that they're really trying to get, and yet there's literally millions that are affected by this thing. And we call it a debacle because we had thought this year, 2024, that everyone is going to have to file all these returns. And at the very last minute, even when many people had already filed them, the government said, oh, like the day before, they said, oh, you don't have to file them. Kind of realized, not required this year. Now, they still haven't said what's happening for next year. So it may well be another debacle next year that on the deadline for filing, they're going to say, oh, you don't have to file this again. We'll see what happened. Maybe they've kind of said they're going to clarify it. In reality, it doesn't really make sense. Like these in trust for accounts, these are not their main target. These are not people hiding with tons of money. So I think they should be able to make some sort of an exception for this. But as it stands today, that is the rule. Now, if you look at these hacks, hack number 4, the entrust for account actually reaches $70,000. And that's, with fluctuation, it could have times it's higher than that. So you'd actually have to get involved in there. Now, the rules of this, another issue with this whole thing is to show you that it wasn't thought through. The rules are actually not clear. But what it looks like is they're defining the trust as all trusts that somebody has where the trustees and beneficiaries are all the same. So if you have multiple ones, it doesn't matter. They have to add them all up when you file this T3 trust return. However, you and your spouse each have separate in-trust for accounts for the child. That's different trustees. So those would count separately. So you could have $50,000 for each one of them. So that's what it looks like the rules are. So that if you're getting up to $70,000 in the in-trust for account, you could start with one. But if you're getting up somewhere, over 40, you're getting closer to 50, then just open up a second one. So you get one for each parent. And then you get up to $100,000 then before you have to file it. So that's a way that we could do hack number 4 without running into all these trust rules. But it's a rule you have to be aware of if you're using these in-trust for accounts. They can be excellent accounts for saving. And if you're investing for growth, it can really be tax-free. Because capital gains, interest and dividends are taxable to the trust, to the parent, but capital gains to the child. So if you invest for capital gains, there's essentially no tax on it. It's actually a cool method. Now, should you use a family RESP or individual RESP? So if you have several kids, you can have them all in one RESP, or you can have a separate account for each one. Now, the family RESP, what it's best for is flexibility. So if you want to be able to allocate savings to whichever child you want. And it's also what happens when you withdraw, that you're saving for several kids, and people kind of think, well, it should be fair. We don't give each one the same amount. But often fair, depending on how you define it, isn't giving each child the same amount. Let's say you've got 2 children, and one of them goes to Harvard or goes to med school and has very expensive costs, or something, a very expensive program. And another one goes to a different university, takes a program with a co-op program, and it costs hardly anything. So one of them is paying way more in education costs than the other. So is fair giving them each the same amount of money? Or is fair, paying the tuition or whatever you're going to, paying the cost for each of them, so you give one of them a lot more? So a family RESP is very good for using that because they can actually use each other's money. They can't take more than the total grant of the total $7,200 for any one child. However, they can easily transfer it to the other one. So generally, family RESP is best for that. It's also just simpler than having, multiple ones. Individual is best if you, for some reason, want to specifically track each child. So you have one for each, you put money in for each. When they go to school, they each take their own out. Whatever's left, they each get. So you've tracked it separately for each child. We found that hardly any parents actually want to do that. They want to have that flexibility of deciding themselves what is fair at the time they're in university. So in most cases, family RESP is the way to go. And you can open up, you get your first child, you can open up a family RESP anyway, even though you don't have more kids. But that way, when you have a second kid, you just add a name to the existing account, and now you can put, you can contribute for both of them. For most people, that's the best way to do it. All right, so that's my talk for today. Thanks for listening. So again, we covered the top 5 hacks to maximize your child's RESP. We talked about how much a 4-year degree might cost. Is it good for it to pay for your child's education? What asset allocation is best to maximize the RESP? What are the RESP contribution rates? What do most parents do to contribute for their child's RESP? What are the top 5 hacks to maximize your RESP? We showed them all and compared them. What are the issues with an in-trust for account? And should you use a family RESP or individual RESP? So thanks for listening. My name is Ed Rempel. My blog is Unconventional Wisdom. It's the #1 blog in Canada for a full-service financial planner. It's just my name, www.edrempel.com. I also have a blog, podcast, and YouTube. So the podcasts, just go to edrebel.com/listen and you'll see all the different places where it is. YouTube, just go to edrebel.com/watch. And we offer a free 30-minute consultation. If you're potentially interested in talking with us, just fill out the form on our blog and we'll set up a free consultation. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.